when one feels under pressure or, that there's conflict coming at them, perhaps from a supervisor, it puts them in this state of anxiety. A critical part of radical candor, if you can lead with witnessing their intention or something that is positive that they're doing, then that sets this tone of peace. You're saying from the beginning, I see you as a person.
Welcome to The Science of Leadership, the podcast dedicated to helping you become a better leader. Here, you'll gain valuable knowledge, hear inspiring stories, and learn the scientific principles that promote exceptional leadership. I'm Tom Collins, your host, and I'm thrilled to have you join us on this journey to becoming a better leader. One of the most difficult yet rewarding responsibilities of leadership is providing honest, direct feedback while also caring deeply about those we lead. Today, we're diving deep into radical candor, the ability to challenge directly while caring personally. To help us explore this, I'm honored to be joined by Dr. Kate Smith, Senior Associate Dean of Biology Education and Professor of Medical Science at Brown University. Dr. Smith has extensive experience in academic leadership and faculty development, where radical candor plays a crucial role in fostering growth, collaboration, and trust. Kate, thank you for joining me today on The Science of Leadership.
Hi, Tom. Thank you so much for having me. Wonderful podcast. Always fun to talk to you. Glad to be here.
Well, let's start with the basics. In Kim Scott's book by the same title, Radical Candor balances honesty and directness with empathy. In your experience or from your perspective, what does radical candor mean?
Yeah, great. So first of all, huge credit to Kim Scott. I admire her work so much. It's helped me tremendously as a leader. She puts it quite simply. It's how to say what you mean without being mean. I think that's what captured me initially when I watched her TED Talk, or maybe it was in the book. But I think that's something that all of us as leaders want to be able to do. More formally, radical candor is described as really caring personally about people while challenging them directly. And it requires both parts to be able to pull it off effectively. I think when we care about people personally, we need to really value them as people, as humans, as individuals, and not just as workers. And that then puts us in a position for our direct challenge or encouragement to change as being received by them really effectively. Radical candor, I think of as being short and direct and impactful. And we can talk about this, but Kristen Scott really lays out this idea that if radical candor is not happening, there's usually three other things that are. And she refers to those as manipulative insincerity, obnoxious aggression, and ruinous empathy. And I think we should spend some time talking about those because usually I think all of us as leaders sit in one of those buckets if we're not already in the radical candor space.
Yeah, let's do that. Let's hit on those. So which one do you want to start with?
Let's do obnoxious aggression. All right. This is the boss that no one wants. And I think all of us as leaders are probably striving to never be. So this is the brutal honesty space. It's when you just challenge someone without offering any appreciation, empathy, or understanding. In those cases, that's where people just feel attacked. All they hear and feel is the attack, and they're usually not going to pay attention at all to the criticism. So, here's an example, and I think Kristen Scott uses this in one of her talks or books. So, Tom, you've just given a speech, and you've given the first half. You need to go back on stage, give the other half. You come off stage, and you have lettuce in your teeth. And I'm your supervisor, and I say, Tom, you look ridiculous. You've had lettuce in your teeth the whole time. This is horribly embarrassing. That's all you hear. And now you're just mortified. So that's obnoxious aggression. No one wants to be that person or receiving that. Another one is kind of the opposite. Kristen Scott refers to it as manipulative insincerity. This is, it's really where praise is insincere, or often when a leader might be talking about an individual's transgressions behind their back. This is kind of, really nasty stuff and creates toxic workplaces often. The example here would be you come off the stage from your speech and you've got that lettuce in your teeth. And I say to you, boy, Tom, you look really professional up there. You sound good too. You have nothing to address. And then you go off feeling good. And I say to your colleague, Jerry, next to me, Jerry, can you believe Tom had lettuce in his teeth? He looks ridiculous. So that's manipulative insincerity. And then the last one is called ruinous empathy. And I think this is one, and Scott talks about this, is where most people as leaders kind of tend to sit. This is where your leader is a very caring person, almost to a fault. And, they're protecting their employees or their team's short-term feelings more than they are moving to direct them address directly. They don't want to hurt people's feelings, and so they don't say anything. And Scott really talks about this as, a place that leads to leaders' most regrettable mistakes, where they've just let poor performance perhaps go too long without
Mm.
addressing it. And so you come off the stage, you have lettuce on your teeth, you're going to go back on the stage. And all I say to you is amazing, great job, you look super, and never tell you.
Yeah.
So I think, it's worth looking at her work because she has this really nice grid of radical candor, obnoxious aggression, manipulative insincerity, and ruinous empathy. And they kind of are just really thoughtful buckets for where people tend to sit as leaders.
Yeah. As I think about those, they each represent a shortcoming on the part of the leader. Obnoxious aggression is probably a lack of caring. If we talk about the, what is it?
Manipulative insincerity.
Manipulative. Yeah. Manipulative insincerity is a lack of character, right?
Mm,
Because you're, it's somebody who's two-faced and all that goes with that, duplicitous.
mm.
And and then the third, it's hard to say for sure whether it's in the competence bucket, maybe, but it may be in the character bucket in the sense of lacking moral courage, right? Because I mean, we've all been in that situation where somebody does have spinach or lettuce or whatever in their teeth, or a nose goblin or whatever it may be, right? And the easy thing to do is to say, well, I don't want to embarrass them by saying they've got this or whatever. So you'd rather them be embarrassed with all these other people by not telling them. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
so I think that all of those three that are negatives, that Kim Scott has really synthesized in a great way, reflect a significant deficiency on the part of the person. In this case, we're talking about leaders, to actually act and behave and interact with others in a way that they should be.
I think you're right. And I think when you start really thinking about these four buckets, a leader is it's imperative for the leader to take a look at themselves, perhaps in all aspects of their life and all of their relationships. What are my habits and tendencies, and why may I be conflict averse in the spirit of ruinous empathy and sit in that space? It really takes you down a introspective rabbit hole, which is probably a good thing for leaders.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I live in the introspective rabbit hole probably. So,
Yeah.
well, I'm curious, you gave the examples, of someone speaking, but have you personally, I mean, I know you have, but can you share a story where this idea of radical candor really played out, and what did that look like?
I have so many examples, and in fact, I was thinking about this podcast, and I was trying to remember what was the first time as a leader that I ever employed this, and I found my notes on that, and I recall I had read the book and watched the TED Talk and started to speak with some on my team about radical candor. Have you ever heard of this thing? Is this something we can try? What do you think? I'm always a fan of transparency. And I knew that there was one individual who would benefit from this, but, I was nervous to give that very direct feedback, and I was looking at my notes, and I actually wrote down exactly what I wanted to say because I didn't wanna get it wrong. And remember, radical candor, the idea is that it happens in real time and it's fast. You cut to the chase. You don't need to
Mhm.
talk about it for 5 minutes, you just give them the feedback. So this was a case where it was an individual who, very energetic, positive energy, really excited to be a part of a team, but was constantly missing deadlines. So I thought, okay, next time there's a missed deadline, I'm going to use radical candor. I'm going to address it right away. And I was nervous. And so I wrote down what I wanted to say. And I was looking at my notes, and this is exactly what I said to this individual. Right after the deadline was missed, I said, I need to be honest with you. I need to be honest with you. Your missed deadlines are impacting the team's ability to move forward. I know you're capable of so much and you're an important member of the team. Let's talk specifically about what's getting in the way and how I can support you in meeting this expectation. And that was it. I don't know if I ended up saying it exactly like that, but it was three sentences and
Yeah.
it worked. I remember in the moment this individual they were just sort of shocked by this very curt and direct, yet I hope caring insight. And they said, "You're right." And it never happened again. I mean, it doesn't always work that beautifully, but this was the first time. And not only that, but they owned it and followed up with their colleagues and expressed some remorse for having missed deadlines and impacted them. So that was the first time that I've used this. I use it a lot with students, but I try to, anytime I can, let teams know that this is something we do. I'm trying to make it a part of our culture. So when I have a new team or a new committee or a new group or a new class, I try to introduce it, talk about what it is, why it's valuable, do a pulse check, who's heard of this, who would like to try it, and then we kind of all agree to try to use it together. I think when you have the fortune of doing that with a new team, you're setting common ground with them from the get-go and you're getting buy-in to give it a shot. And when you can do that, it for me, it has felt easier for it to be a part of how we work moving forward versus trying to kind of bring it in when you've never done it before. I think we should all try to do that anyway. But that was my very first example, and I'm happy to share some others as well.
Yeah, thanks for sharing. And that's a great example. I think it reflects a little bit of the coaching mindset too in
Yeah.
there. But one thing that you did, I think that, or you do, that's valuable also is that you set expectations now with this idea, right? Like you don't just spring it on people out of the blue per se. You've set that up that this is how we're going to operate, and I think that setting that expectation probably makes it a lot more effective because people then understand, okay, here's what's happening, and I know the purpose behind it,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah. I think that's true, and I think and maybe you've experienced this too in your leadership roles, when you have at least talked about new things that you're gonna do or the way that you're going to work together moving forward, there's often some resistance at the beginning. Not everybody will get their way, but at least you've talked about it and you've kind of agreed as a team, like, "This is how we're gonna try this." So when something down the line doesn't work out or there's resistance, you can come back to that agreement and say, we've agreed that we're gonna try radical candor. Is it gonna go beautifully every time? No, but we're gonna practice it. We've agreed to that, so that's why we're doing it. I think that that can be helpful.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. I can say that that's something that that I've done over the years. I've learned. So, as an attending physician, I have trainees, and we will be on rounds. And I come from training in the Northeast, where it was very direct. In a different time too, right? So it was very aggressive, direct, no polish. And, as someone who's from the South, I've tried to polish a little bit, but I tend toward that sort of Northeastern kind of approach, or have in the past. And so I can say that, I mean, I remember, you know, being on rounds and, hey, what do you think the diagnosis could be, this sort of thing or whatever,
Mhm.
and being much more direct, right? Um, Without necessarily having the radical candor component of how can we work on this together? How can I help you? What do you see as possible options? Those sorts of things. And and so and increasingly with younger generations, there's this sense of, the anxiety and things that we're seeing. And so that now I set the stage. Okay, when I ask you a question, I'm not trying to make you feel bad or make you look dumb. I'm trying to figure out what you know so that I don't waste both of our times talking about something you already know, right?
Mhm.
And so setting it in that frame, and then actually using some of these techniques with regard to radical candor, I
Yeah.
find that goes so much further and is so much more helpful for the student or the trainee because there isn't that amygdala fight or flight or freeze response. They're able to receive it.
Mhm.
Whereas if I'm just being, Philly sort of maneuver, then the response is a totally different one that actually isn't as helpful. It's important, now science will tell us, is actually important to have some degree of increased sphincter tone. A little bit of anxiety actually improves our performance and our learning. But when it's really ramped up, we lose all that. So anyway,
Yeah, I think that's true. I was thinking about you in medicine or in, people who are perhaps in the military or, in very intense work environments that radical candor might almost be most beneficial in those places where you need to be able to respond in real time with feedback and then just move. There's not time to spend, dancing around issues
right.
or half saying what you need to happen or anyway, you need to say it and you need to give feedback and then we need to move on. So I did think, about you and that might be especially important in the medical environment.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. Because in those moments, seconds count.
Yeah.
Life is determined in seconds, right? So if you screw something up, right? I mean, I can remember as a third year medical student, you're basically the bottom of the barrel, and being a human instrument in a real sense. So I remember being on surgery rotation, and I was holding a retractor. Retractor is this metal implement that basically you hold and you pull on, and it moves tissue and flesh out of the surgical field so the surgeon can
Mhm.
see what they're doing. And so, you have two surgeons who are side by side, and I'm holding a retractor under their armpits, like in this entirely unergonomical position for hours in the middle of the night while they're operating on someone's abdomen, right?
Mhm.
And if the retractor needs to be moved, it doesn't matter that it bothers my arm or that I'm doing it wrong, right? It's like this person dies if this isn't done right. And so they're just like, move, do this, that, whatever. Um, and so in those moments, it really is like there's no feedback. We had a guest on the program Admiral Mike Rogers, and he was telling about an event off the coast of Grenada, okay, back in the 80s. And this event where Navy SEALs were pinned down and they needed air support, naval air support in the moment.
Mhm.
And the person who was citing all of a sudden determined they couldn't take a human life, right? Like they couldn't help out with this operation. And so in that second, there had to be a change. There was no time for feedback and talk about it in that way. But most of the time, we're not in those situations, right? We're not in those life and death instances.
Mhm.
And so if we can take the time and do this, as you outlined so beautifully, we can be so much more effective.
Yeah, I think so. And you made a point a few minutes ago about when one feels under pressure or, that there's conflict coming at them, perhaps from a supervisor, it puts them in this state of anxiety. And they're all of the reptilian brain fires and it's fight or flight or freeze and cortisol pulses through the system. And, in that very moment, it's very difficult to just think clearly and focus on the information. And I think that, a critical part of radical candor being effective is about that caring focus on the person coming first. So, if you can lead with witnessing their intention or something that is positive that they're doing, then that sets this tone of peace. You're saying from the beginning, I see you as a person and, that you're capable of this thing or what you're doing well here. And then you follow with the direct feedback. In theory, you are helping that person stay in a more calm space. But you have to kind of gauge it as you go. I think it certainly can be shocking to some individuals to receive feedback like that, even if it comes, after praise. So a piece of this is in the moment that you're delivering it, gauging where the person is at. Can you use what you see in their body language or their tone to determine, are they in freeze? Are they in flight? Are they in shock? And now you've got to kind of decide, do I go back a bit more to praise and understanding, or perhaps they're staying very resistant. And now you have to lean in more to being direct and ensuring they're hearing you. So, a lot of it happens in real time. And as a leader, being able to kind of sense all of those cues and let that very quickly help you determine where do you head next is another piece of this.
Yeah, I think that there's so much psychology and neurophysiology that we're talking about here with
Yeah.
regard to how this works and kind of why it works. I think, you know, hopefully that helps our listeners to begin to understand the real value of this,
Mhm.
that it changes the negative impacts that we can have into something that can be positive and effective. Um, as you think about it, just generally, what do you see as I mean, we've hit on this a little bit, but the real value of radical candor?
Honestly, I think it's probably what everybody wants in their lives. If you have this in place, what else do you have? You have trust.
Yeah.
You have the ability to go more deeply and address issues directly with people so that in theory is building stronger connections one-on-one or in teams. It leads to efficiency. You're not dancing around issues or delaying giving feedback. So how much more efficient can we be if we can cut to the chase kindly and address issues in real time?
Cut to the
So I think
chase
about
kindly. I like that.
yeah, so trust, deeper connection, more efficiency. I aspire to think that once people start to embrace this, practice it, and see that they use it often, that it infuses into the rest of their life and outside of the workplace. And maybe that's there's benefit there as well.
Yeah, you're hitting on something that, from the standpoint of the work that I've done in leadership in the book and so forth, that's coming out in July. This idea that these things that we're talking about right now and on this podcast, it's not just about leadership,
Mhm.
right? It's about a better life, being a better human. How to interact with people better and how to have a more positive impact in the world. So I agree with you 100%. And I try to share studies where people have looked at the particular idea that we're talking about, since this is the science of leadership. Turns out that Kim Scott published Radical Candor in 2015. So in science years, that's not very long for somebody to identify that this idea exists and then to start to study it. So I can't cite studies that have been done on radical candor per se. There are people who have written things about it, like Veach and Kim wrote about it and said, and sort of defined it a little bit differently, but similar. Proactive and compassionate engagement with unpleasant and direct feedback. So that's how
Yeah.
they defined it. But I was able to, just like you were hitting on trust and so forth, we can look at the components of radical candor, and people have studied those. You know, the
Hmm.
idea of transparency and empathy. I think that's in my mind, that's what radical candor is. It's this collision, if you will, or collision is probably too violent word,
Union,
melding,
marriage.
marriage, that's good. Union of transparency, being honest,
Hmm.
forthright, no duplicitousness, and empathy, right? And so those have been studied. And so if we look at transparency, a lot of studies have shown that transparency, we can call that honesty, we can call it forthrightness, whatever term you want to use, but it creates an environment of, just as you said, trust. It fosters psychological safety.
No.
And listeners will have heard me say the name Amy Edmondson before.
Yeah.
And so she's a Harvard professor who's really studied this idea of psychological safety. And her studies have shown that transparency is vital for creating that in an
Hmm.
organization. And it's imperative when it comes to collaboration, innovation, performance, all the things that people say they want in their organizations, right? And
Hmm.
then if we look at empathy, that's been studied a lot, and a lot of positive impacts with regard to empathy. There was this study in 2019 of 257 participants, and Koch and colleagues found that job satisfaction, innovation, and overall performance were higher among those employees who had empathetic leaders. So there
Hmm.
are, some of the scientific data that I could share, but that's really, just touching on that a little bit.
Yeah.
I was wondering, Kate, how do you see leaders often get this wrong?
I would say, first of all of those are very interesting things. And before I answer your question,
Yeah,
what you were talking about there reminded me of Esther Perel's work, which is really about relationships of any type. And she says that the quality of our lives um, are dependent on the quality of our relationships, whatever
yeah,
the relationship, whether it's a romantic partner, with your child, with your parent, at work. And I think for me, that's at the core of all of this. And things
yeah,
like practicing psychological safety and radical candor. I think those help us have the relationships that we want. And if our relationships are high quality and there's peace and ease and honesty and connection, I think everybody feels really good when that's going on. So
sure,
anyway,
yeah.
I appreciated everything that you just said, and it just reminded me of Esther Perel's work. Where do leaders get radical candor wrong? I have a couple of thoughts on this. You can't fake the empathy part,
Right,
right?
yeah,
You can't, and that piece is so critical. You can't say to your direct report, in the spirit of radical candor, you really suck because you missed so many deadlines. That's still being a jerk, right?
right,
So I think really trying to make sure that you are authentic and genuine in your care for your teams. And maybe some leaders aren't, but I don't know that one can, really reach the pinnacle of their leadership ability without that. So I don't think you can fake the empathy part. I feel like for me, to be able to bring radical candor to my groups and teams, I had to take a really hard look at myself first and make
yeah,
sure that I was receiving radical candor and seeking it out and, on the receiving end of it so that, I could be better. One of the things that I'm doing right now is studying the Stoic philosophers. I find it
yeah,
fascinating. And one of their practices, like Marcus Aurelius or
mhm,
Epictetus, was to set the tone for the day in their work lives and then review the day at the end of the day. So, I think leaders sometimes might get this wrong if they're not prepping to do it well and then reviewing how it went and tweaking based off of that. We're all very busy as leaders and sometimes we're very focused on the work and the product and the output and the deadlines, but the real work is in those interactions with individuals. So I think studying yourself in how you deliver it. And then the last one is, don't forget that praise is an equal part. We think about radical candor as using it to offer critical feedback on an issue or a problem, but you should use it exactly the same way to offer praise in real time when you see it. So, radical candor can come in the form of saying to someone after that meeting, you know, um, I see that you're working really hard at this. I wanted to let you know that the way you're communicating seems really polished and thoughtful, and you're doing a great job at that. Thank you. So, making sure there's some of both happening and just not forgetting about that piece too.
yeah.
Yeah.
The thing you've just shared there is radical candor doesn't necessarily have to be negative, right? Like there's
Yeah.
this, as we've been talking, there's this sense of, okay, there's a problem and I'm going to approach it, this feedback, but it's really important. What I'm hearing you say just then, it's really important to have radical candor with regard to positive feedback too, right?
Yeah, I think we have to do that, and sometimes I see leaders who are trying to practice like bringing radical candor to their teams as a supervisor, where maybe there's one individual there where there are a lot of challenges, and they're using this regularly, and they're very focused on, well, this individual just there's challenges with them. You can, as a leader, perhaps have tunnel vision on those challenges, but even that individual, every now and then, is going to get something right. And they deserve that praise in the form of radical candor in that moment. Even if you, as a supervisor, are kind of overall frustrated with
Yeah.
them and you're trying to work on things, don't forget that because, at the end of the day, they're human too, right? It's not black and white. Often these things are very gray and people deserve the praise, even if it is deserved less frequent than the criticism.
Yeah. Right. I mean, you have to establish an environment where it's not, oh no, here they come to tell me what I'm doing wrong all the time.
Exactly. Yeah, you said
Yeah.
that really well. That's exactly it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Kate, those are some great practical, thoughtful ways that, we can work to do this well. Well, Kate, some of the components I've read that are important with regard to radical candor, in addition to those ones that you just shared. Number one is a genuine intention to help and not
Mhm.
to harm others.
Yeah.
Um, I think that's so important. Certainly, there are people who are out there. We've all experienced them. Who it seems their intention is very much to harm others with regard to feedback. So,
Yeah.
having a genuine intention to help people, make sure to use concrete examples of
Mhm.
things that people need to address. And so, you were at the outset talking about, lettuce in someone's teeth. I mean, that's a concrete example, right? Or hey, your presentation is highly polished. Maybe it was a little too technical. You may have lost some of the people with the technicalities that you included. Might be an example of that. The third, being willing to clearly express your emotions, and that is to really focus on demonstrating that you care about the person, which gets back, again to number one, this intention to help people instead of harm. That's born out of this idea of caring. So that would be the third, and then the fourth, and golly, this is just universal for leaders in general. So this is a major take-home point for anybody listening. Be able to question your own assumptions. And that really
Yeah.
gets to our cognitive biases, which we've touched on quite a bit on the science of leadership, especially the fundamental attribution error. So question your own assumptions.
I love that. I'm glad you said that. One of curiosity as a leader is so important to me, and I'm still growing in that space. I think there's a twist on radical candor, which could be radical curiosity. Oftentimes, radical candor works well when you know the very specific thing that you need to address with someone. But we as leaders don't always understand why that's happening. For someone who has a hard time receiving that feedback, that even if it comes with praise, starting with radical curiosity can be another twist on this. And I'll tell you, you asked me earlier, can these tools be applied outside of your leadership life? Radical candor does not work with my teenage boys, but radical curiosity does.
Yeah,
Help me understand, or I noticed that, or, what's going on here as a way to get to the how and the why and offer some insight, but not necessarily doing it in an authoritative way. So I think you are right on about that. We don't always know everything.
yeah,
And if something is brought to us, there's usually another side of that story or multiple sides. So I think the curiosity is a huge part of this. And I like to use radical curiosity in addition to radical candor for exactly the reasons that you just
yeah.
mentioned.
I think that's brilliant. What I'm hearing is, what is this, 2025? 2028 on a bookshelf near you, Radical Curiosity by Dr. Kate Smith. That's going to be a good one. I'm looking forward to that already.
Yeah, well, you'll co-author it if it happens.
uh,
Yeah.
I would say that our, executive leadership training program that we went
Mhm.
through there at Brown really helped me to develop a lot of these skills, including this idea of, uh, I don't know that I'm radically curious yet, but I'm working on it. But a lot of these skills with regard to radical candor, the ability to be vulnerable in ways like
Mhm.
to do really kind of silly things. Jeff and I laying on the floor in that room and
Oh,
looking up
yes.
the ceiling and acting like we're seeing clouds and that like that. That was just insane. But to be able to do that, set aside my assumptions,
Yeah.
be able to in the moment really be concerned about the other person
Yeah.
without relinquishing that goal of really helping the other person. Right.
Yeah, I think we learned a lot of great stuff there. They taught us, and I think it's so true, that a coach perceives the coachee as creative, resourceful, and whole. And I think, being a leader, if you are working towards radical candor for your teams, keeping that in the back of your mind is helpful because I think oftentimes people do have it within them to find a way to course correct when there's an issue. And so if you can perceive them that way as creative, resourceful, and whole and empower them with the criticism or the feedback that you've delivered kindly to find a solution, time and time again, I think people surprise you when they're able to do it.
yeah. That's really helpful,
Yeah.
and I think a great way to close out our conversation today. Kate, as always, great to get to talk with you. It's been a pleasure to have you on the Science of Leadership today. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you, Tom. The pleasure is mine. It's humbling. I'm such a fan of the work that you're doing. It's really important. So thank you so much.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of the Science of Leadership. We hope today's discussion has inspired you and given you valuable insights to help you become a better leader. Remember, leadership is about helping those we lead do great things. It's a journey of continual growth and learning. When we embrace that journey with curiosity, courage, and humility, we can confront challenges, overcome barriers, and foster environments where everyone can succeed. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to follow or subscribe, leave a comment, and share it with others who are passionate about leadership. Until next week, keep leading with character, competence, caring, and communication. This is Tom Collins. Let's keep growing.